everybody. Thank you for joining us again for In Scope podcast. I have Jesse White here from Katalyst joining me again because we had such high demand. He wanted to come back and join us here. And as always, thank you for joining us. And
John, pleasure to be here.
Bringing your wisdom to this little table.
It shouldn't be long then. Yeah, that's right. That's right. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, man. So I have this theory. Well, it's not a theory. This actually happens. So there's a process, right? In most VAR MSP organizations, it's sales, pre-sales, post-sales, right?
Yep.
Sales responsibility, engaging with the client, forming some level of relationship, trying to understand what problem they're trying to solve.
Sure.
Bringing pre-sales in, whether they were there for the first conversation, doesn't really matter. But pre-sales role is typically scoping a project, building a bill of materials, helping craft a solution.
Sure.
Post-sales, the lovely people that actually end up doing the work that was scoped and priced out, right? Love them. But what I want to talk about today and get your feedback on is that really that transition from pre-sales to post-sales.
Okay.
The importance of, again, clarity going into what was scoped, how it was priced, a work breakdown, whatever it may be, whatever tools you use to then hand off to the post-sales team to make sure that when they start delivering this work, it's what the client wanted.
Great.
Right. And so go.
All right.
Tell us how you handle that process and kind of what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's still iterative.
Yeah.
We've made some big strides here in the last couple of years to what I would say weed out some of the small challenges for maybe some of the more bespoke solutions that we're building for customers. I think really when solutions engineers identify problems, they have to then solution those, right? Gain agreement, and then from there, they're able to do that. And if you think about this, is literally a 400-meter relay, right? You ever run one of those?
A long time ago, I had track pants on, and I would every time I jump over the hurdle, would catch the wind would catch my pants.
It makes sense then. Okay.
Sorry, you didn't need to know that.
No, I didn't. But thanks for sharing it with the 40,000 subscribers,
million,
right? Yeah, whatever it is. So if you think about the relay, right, you have your first leg, which is really the kind of pace setter. And so they run and then they hand it off to 2 and to 3 and then to the anchor leg. And the anchor leg is fundamentally supposed to be able to close any gap between them and their competition and ultimately win the race. Right?
That's where I would typically be in those races.
Yes.
The fastest one.
And so in saying that, there's no difference in between our business and a relay, right? What we do is high velocity. Believe it or not, most of the time when customers execute statements of work, they're expecting it to be delivered relatively, timely. And so there's this whole, kind of global chip shortage thing for sort of those partners that are still doing on-premise stuff. But in the cloud and kind of modernized world, there is no really, I guess, barrier to provisioning, right? And so when that baton gets dropped between the seller to the pre-sales resource, through the engineering and PMO organization, and then finally on to CX, it's really bad. Yeah. It is really bad. In fact, this is one of the biggest issues that can plague an organization because it takes a long time to build a reputation of excellence, right?
So that's a good call out. So sales, pre-sales, engineering,
CX.
Engineering and PMO kind of in the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think engineers. We have some tools, as you know, in our business that are forecasting those things and their resources. But the PMO is really the one that guides and directs them to make sure that they're not running too hot, but they're not running too cold either. Right? There's a sweet spot for engineers, and again, back to an earlier episode, that thing that they love doing, right? Like it's just like the persona of a seller and a solutions engineer together. I don't want to put ever an engineer in a Black Hawk Down zone, right? Of like, hey, here you go. Here's a bomb. Go figure it out.
Literally.
Like, we don't do that. Yeah, literally. And so with that being the case, it is that last leg, or the middle leg really between solutions engineering or pre-sales is seems to be in your vernacular. The acceptable term to engineering and PMO, I think is critical. And there's a lot of process there. And then maybe even more importantly, because we're creatures of habit as humans. It's just what we do. Having a mechanism to go back and actually measure, right, what you thought X was going to take and what X actually took. Right, so that's the key.
So the mechanics of handing that off from solution, and I'm going to use your word now.
Sure.
Sales engineering, solution engineering, to that engineering team, the ones doing the work. Like, what are some of the things that you've found helpful to hand off to them as a part of that internal kickoff process?
Yep. So I think the first thing is engineering ID, right? And so what we call is who is going to be pegged to do this project. Right? Who gets the long straw in this case to deliver something that I scoped at least?
Right.
But the point is that I think you got to kind of narrow down like who my
who's going to deliver the project.
Yeah, literally, right. And so once
staffing, resourcing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, all those great things. And then once you have that, kind of identified, there's a judgment of is the resource even engaged with the client, right? Do they need a full immersion in what's going on?
I mean, have they done work with a client in the past? Literally. Do they know their environment? That kind of
exactly.
thing? Okay.
And then I think from that perspective, once that's identified, it really falls on that pre-sales engineer and post-sales engineer to make sure that baton is not dropped. And so what we do, obviously, on the Scope Stack platform is that scope is reviewed.
Yep.
And then through Salesforce, we use some automation throughout that process to make sure that it follows certain gates, customers are communicated to, right? All those kinds of things happen. So once the project is signed by the client and the SOW that we generate from Scope Stack, a certain order of dominoes happens, right? And 17 things, right? I'm very process rich. And so that being the case, there's 17 things that happen. And these gates, right, if you want to call them that, we don't pass the next one until those things are done, right?
Yeah.
And there's timers and relays and on that. And I think that's really, in the role of what I'm responsible for, at least on that team, the more important part is the post-project exercise.
Got it.
Right?
So after a project's been delivered, you track your time against some sort of, okay, what did we scope?
Yep.
You tracked your time against that. That's essentially what you're talking about at this point, right?
And so if you have 5 or 6 guys out building scopes, right, which is what I have, the big problem Scope Stack was like, okay, John is in this region of the country and he's focused on these 2 technologies, and Sam is in this region of the country and maybe she's focused on these 3 technologies. But, intertwine sometimes those projects, you have different technologies that overlap. And so what will happen is if you're not measuring the actual profitability of that thing, right, whatever it is that you're doing, you can really gum up your P&L on the engineering side. And if you want to get engineers mad at solutions engineers or pre-sales guys, it's not give them enough time in the project and put it at a lower rate than they're used to, right? And like those are the 2 cardinal sins.
Yeah.
And so one of the processes that we've implemented that I think would be transformational for anybody if you're not doing it. So here's like the one thing to take away.
Yeah.
If you are not measuring post-project success, then you should stop what you're doing right now and put that meeting on your calendar.
Right.
Even if you just start with a monthly cadence, it's the whole post-mortem conversation of like have the pre-sales engineer at the table and make sure that you as the implementation engineer can express, hey, in this work effort right here, you only gave me 37 hours. It ended up taking me like 4.
Yeah.
Right. And so not only, well, that's great. And everybody thinks, oh, good. But you can also lose business, right, if you're not pricing that. So there's this kind of zone where you have to just be dialed in, plus or minus, a few percent. So
those engineers that are doing the work, you think they're okay with actually tracking time at a certain level of granularity, right? Because I've heard otherwise that like you ask them to track their time in that level of granularity, then they're not going to do it. They're not going to like you.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
Like, is there a balance?
Yeah. I mean, I think for everybody, I mean, like most organizations, right? There's a time policy and there are things that you're supposed to do with that. And what happens is eventually the customer is going to get an invoice, right? And on that invoice, it's going to say, John Scott, 12 hours. And it better not just be worked on XYZ, right? Like you
some
have
high
to
level
put some sort of content, right? And that's really the beauty is to be able to assign that to a specific group of tasks and then pull that language in and just modify it a little bit, right? Not rewrite it every single time. But we've not had, I guess, much resistance. And the reason maybe is that we've aligned, compensation metrics around time delivery. Meaning if you don't get your timesheets in, right, in certain, semesters of the month, week, whatever, then there'll be penalties that may impact you to the negative. And not that you won't get it, it'll just be delayed, right?
Then,
and people don't like that.
That whole cycle, right? So we call that, a whole cycle. So from solutions engineering to post sales, and then like bringing that back, there's, to your point, like there's alignment between pre and post sales engineering when you come back and have that meeting, because the pre-sales guy doesn't want to be the one that's like making the engineer angry, right? They don't want to underscope the hours. They want to be right just as much as that person wants to be
so
right.
I think back to the grit that we have and we focus on, it's really around like we want to be as close to perfect as we can, but knowing that there's always going to be a little bit of drift.
Sure.
And so I think the biggest thing is that if you're not slowing down enough to learn when projects are just inherently complex, or customers, just by the nature of the name that's on the front of their door, are inherently complex, you can do some unneeded damage. And that's what I love really about your app, is that we have the ability to adjust at scale, right? And so I know if I've got 5 guys building, bodies of work out, I don't have to go through and tell everyone and change 17 spreadsheets, because like everybody, used to have their own spreadsheet. Sure. And in the tool, right, I can click at one place and cascade that down. And then if I want to look at this is a crazy idea. Like, check this out. We're actually going to compare the forecasted, revenue and gross profit against the actual. Yeah. Right. Like in this same process.
Mind blowing.
It's just a really great tool that ScopeStack allows me to share with that institution and organization. And I think that is like intentionally measuring those things. And again, the big tip is, if you're not doing it, do it monthly. For every project you closed out in the last month, get your solutions engineering team, even if it's just one person, get them in a room for 30 minutes and go through. This project was budgeted for 1,142 hours, yet we delivered it in 800. Well, did we automate our way out of it? Like, let's do more of those, or should we adjust our price and do more, whatever. But the point is when you get the other side of that equation, John, and it's this project was scoped for 1,142 hours and it took us 1,600, somebody's losing. Right. And I know lots of again, my peers, and this is incestuous community, especially here where we are, in the solutions engineering space, we all know each other, right? We all see each other at the same events in, San Diego or Vegas or wherever we're going. Right. Yeah. And one of the things we always ask each other, and I'm a part of 2 peer groups, right? If you're not in a peer group with talking to other people out of region, like it's the most valuable thing you can do. Right. It's usually doesn't cost anything. And as long as you're willing to be transparent and vulnerable, and you can learn a lot. Yeah. Right. I know you're probably in some of those too. Yeah. But I think that the biggest thing is that this is this constant debate or really cosmic challenge around how you compensate the solutions engineer. That'd be a great topic for an upcoming show with somebody that knows a lot more about it than me. But the point is that sometimes there's penalties to be paid when things don't come out in the wash okay, right? And so where does that tax fall? Because the other thing too is, John, is all engineers aren't equal, right? And believe it or not, I could probably implement something still to this day, another great episode, faster than you could.
I don't know about that.
Well, okay, all right, well, maybe not. But the point is like you also have to be cognizant of the implementation style of the engineer. Yeah. And while everything has a process and everything's well documented, there's still different.
There's a weighting almost.
There is, and there's just a different rate, right? Some people are heavier in some areas and they're stronger here, and maybe they're slower here. And remember like when what we used to do had 3 components, right? It was like 2 green boxes and a blue one. Yeah. And like there's 2, little interfaces on the front. You couldn't even screw it up, right? And now what we're asking these men and women to do is really
it's complex stuff.
Connect the world, right, at light speed with no darkness or no downtime. Right. And so and do all that with security wrapped around it. It's just a difficult thing to do. And I think you have to be conscious. But if you're not measuring those things and tracking those and taking the scope stack front end and said, this was going to be 47% margin, but on the output, it was 21. And then I did 2 of them and I got it up to 29 and I'm still not there, right? It just allows you to continue to iterate and then add buffers and even customer taxes, if you will, right? To say, hey, every time I work with this customer, I'm always waiting on them, right? I need the PMO to drive more or whatever the case may be. And I think
that's where that analysis comes in super handy, right? Like what were the things that we didn't account for when we were scoping it out on the front end?
There is so much data available to us, right? We're overloaded with it. We've talked about this before when I shared some stories about that. But just like he who tells the best story wins, he who uses data the most intentionally will win. And I think that's the richness of the platform, is really being able to take inputs and turn them into outputs and then measure it again. Right. And so the more closed loop you can make that process, the better everybody's going to be.
So at a bare minimum, right, we want to hand off to our delivery team. Let's just call it a spreadsheet, right? It has this task, this many hours, this quantity potentially, and maybe to the level of detail of like, this is the resource level, to your point, that we recommend,
defined,
or at least we defined or priced out to do this work. There's a spreadsheet, right? 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever, however many hours.
Right.
Deliver the project, come back, that analysis call after delivery. Okay, was it 10 hours? No, it was 5 hours.
Yep.
Okay, well, we should monitor that and see if that's a trend or if that's a one-off thing.
Right.
Because then what I can do is next time I scope a project like this, it'll be accurate and competitive potentially, right? So like, we're going to win more business.
Yep.
Or the opposite, which is what you said earlier, which is this actually keeps taking us 20 hours. Okay, we also need to update that on the front end so that we don't lose all this money and we don't have a resume generating event happen. Right?
Literally an RGE, as they like to call those. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I think spelling that out is that simple, right?
Yeah.
It's just
don't overcomplicate it. Right? Like,
no. But be intentional. And again, I mean, it takes coordination between all groups. And this is back to that baton speed when you're running fast and hard and with the velocity which we run in this business. You got to make sure that the projects are even structured correctly in whatever tool you're using for that, because all of that has to align. You're like, you want to frustrate an engineer, give them something that doesn't match the thing, and I mean it's chaos to them, right? Yeah. And so I think as long as all those steps are followed and you make it as consumable as possible, it's just like our customers. Make it as easy to do business with us as possible. Right. Scope stack, DocuSign, like all this stuff. If you just make sure you do those things and then get the data, it'll change your business. Yeah. I mean, fundamentally change your business.
Yeah. So you mentioned one extra step, which I know not everyone has a group like this, but I think if you do, and so the group I'm talking about is that CX group, right? Sure. So customer success. Yep. I first heard about that whole group like when some OEMs came out with a program, right?
Oh yeah. I think they copied it from us, but
they copied it from you, I'm sure. And so, right, like that's an additional thing that is not required, but I think aligns your business and the client's business better, right? I mean, is that kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal there is not just to measure our NPS or do all the great things that we're trying to do and publish that stuff and just make
sure... For marketing purposes.
Yeah, well, for really, referenceability and just like we want to be the best at these 3.5 things. Right. And that's it. Like we have what's core to us, we have what's chore to us. And those chore things, like that, they're not even in our scope. In scope.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
Good job.
There's a pun. And anyway, I think that CX organization, John, is so critical. And we have some really neat measurements around that. And those are things like, for strategic customers, QBRs. We have something called voice of the customer, right? And this is where if I'm in that group and you are a customer that does over X, Y, or Z and project complexity, cost, whatever it is, I'm going to call you. You don't know me, but I'm just Jesse from Katalyst and I work in CX. Right. And I'm going to ask you how your last engagement was. I'm going to get how likely you are to recommend us. I'm going to do all these things. And I'm going to shine a light of truth on our relationship. with no commission breath risk, right? With no sales, there's no incentive for them. It's literally just about how are we doing? Could we have done something better? Obviously, every project has a survey and a rating and whatever. But the point is this extra what we call white glove approach, even after the sale. I mean, you know how hard it is to gain new customers.
Sure.
We get most of ours from existing customers or from our lovely marketing department. But the point is that having that touch, right, and using that as a point also, and having them, is there anybody else that you think could use this type of service, right? If you just ask that question, people want to help you as long as you're helping them. Right? They want to do good. And so that CX piece, of course, you have to pay for it, right? It's not like Presales is not free either, right? That's another thing about the platform. I love to dial in based on the effort and what we had to put in. But the point is that it's just a service that, we want clients to pay a little bit more when they use our service, but we also want the service to be superior. And I think if you're going down that obsessing over your customer path, it's something that is eventually going to work its way into your business because it has to.
So when we start talking about that full cycle, right? The way we talked about it was CX at the end, but is that team ever involved in the front end pre-sales? Like I know business outcomes, KPIs, like that needs to be built into the front end of engagement, right?
Sure, it does. And so in kind of that new customer acquisition or existing, right, there's components where they will get involved. I would say ideally, in our proven process, right, our guarantee is that if you consume our service and it doesn't work for you, we ask that you give us an opportunity to make it right. But if it doesn't work, we'll give you your money back, right? And that's our pro services. And it is crazy. It's published. It's our 4-step thing, and it's part of our EOS model that we run. It's changed our business for the better. But that CX component, John, just like the PMO and those sorts of things, having them along, engaged in the specific Tiger team or however your organization's set up, it can just do wonders. And again, the information and the needs that they can bring back to you on the solutions engineering side. Hey, John, did you know I was talking to so-and-so, having that stuff stored and documented somewhere? I mean, it's a powerful thing.
Sure.
And something that shows a lot of maturity too. Where it fits in the process every time, I don't know if I can answer that. I can say in strategic clients, right? They're along for the ride. And our managed clients, it is like the umbrella that comes with it.
Right.
And you can't have the cheeseburger without the cheese, right? Like it's got to be there.
You could.
Then it'd be called a hamburger, right? Yeah,
okay. Good call.
Yeah, balloons, whatever you want. So it's
scary times.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, man. All right, so we've talked about the one thing, right? But just to clarify and say it maybe for the 4th time, because I think it's important, right?
16 times on average is what people need to hear something to implement or retain it. And so the 4th time, I'll tell you.
I don't know if I have time.
All right. They can just rewind and we can put a loop in here. The one thing that I feel like that will fundamentally level up your solutions engineering team 10x is to have a monthly post-project review meeting where they are engaged with the engineers. I mean, you do it over beer and wings, right? Like it's a fun thing, right? And challenge, right? Throw spiffs out there of who gets closest or is the most profitable or whatever. I mean, it's like there's 100 things you can do. But the point is like if you're not doing that, you're not as profitable and as successful as you can be. I guarantee it.
Right.
And that one thing will fundamentally transform your organization. And then it's your job as the leader, right, to actually hold your people accountable to that.
Right.
And measuring the pre-sales, I'm just coming up with all kinds of ideas for your next shows with your next guest. But measuring the solutions engineers, like, what is that? Yeah. Right? There's so many things we want to talk about, but scope, efficacy, and efficiency, like that's got to be up there, right? And so how do you do that when you're on a spreadsheet and you're just like wet finger in the wind? Like it's just bad.
Yeah.
So I do think, even I've had my team, buck back about, I didn't know you were putting 3 projects on or 3 people on this project, right? Like I didn't know. That slows me down. I would have built it that way, right? Or you were flying guys in or whatever. So I just think that again, trust and transparency. We have on the engineering call weekly, we have a segment for solutions engineers to give updates on what's going on. Hey, John, we're about to do a really, really big project. It's Duo for 16 apps. Is that still a 100-hour engagement? Right. Well, let's talk after, right? Like just be communicative. People appreciate
I think that's a huge part of having not just operating, in your own swim lane, right? Getting outside of that, talking to that post-sales team as you're scoping a project.
It's huge.
That's a big deal. So awesome, man. This is great as always. Tell the fine people, the 40 million people watching. Are you still on TikTok? What's the best place to find you?
You guys know my handle. The only place to find
Tiny
me.
Dancer?
You could call it that. It's one of my favorite Elton John songs. Is LinkedIn. That's obviously good. It's Big Jess on Twitter. That's a name that I've had for a long time. And then the only other place is through my organization, Katalyst, which is, again, your technology tour guide, not travel agent. And so we're doing that. We're in the journey with our customers. We're starting from start to finish, and we're continuing the journey.
Right.
And that's what we do. So, John, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate, you know what I most appreciate about you?
What?
Appreciate that you were just like me a long time ago. And you said, I have a dream. And you didn't just write it down. You actually implemented it, man.
Yeah, man.
I wish I had the bravery that you had in doing that. Because as you know, I got a lot of ideas.
I'd probably be out of business if you had that bravery. So,
but in all seriousness, man, I'm just proud of you, for what you built. And
I appreciate
it's not just you. I know you're just the
mainly me
pretty face.
Yeah.
The team that I've interacted with, Roy and Alex, just everybody has been great. And I appreciate the support and partnership. And I just want to say, man, you're doing great things. And
I appreciate it.
You're, as you say, programming the future. So it's great.
Love it. All right, man.
Thanks for making my job easier, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you.
All right. Appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
Y'all have a good one.